A Hunter's Awakening, the short story series by Brian Shinomiya, narrated by Jasmine Bartlett. Radha sat in her tent, eagerly preparing for another hunting trip. Finally on her long-awaited yearly expedition, antsy to fulfill her lifelong dream of becoming a skilled hunter and survivalist, Radha's heart was overwhelmed with joy. On this particular occasion, she found herself at a hunting resort nestled in the picturesque state of Colorado. Despite never having imagined herself traveling extensively, she had unexpectedly journeyed to various locations in the past. Nonetheless, the trip to Colorado was particularly memorable with its breathtaking scenery and exciting activities. After experiencing the physical effects of motherhood, Radha finally felt ready to venture out into nature once again. She had spent several months conditioning her body and training for any possible situation, and now felt confident enough to embark on this journey solo. She had also meticulously planned this trip for months, making sure she had all the necessary equipment and supplies to make the journey a success. Her husband, Tom, fortunately enough, had given her a new hunting knife and a bayonet for her Kalashnikov. She had packed her hunting gear but felt nothing else was left behind except for her husband and son whom she promised she'd return to. Radha crawled out of her tent carefully, holding her rifle tightly in her grasp. As she strapped in her supplies and snacks, Radha marveled at the beauty of the wilderness around her and felt a sense of blissfulness as she anticipated the challenges ahead. With each glance around her, she felt more confident in her abilities, knowing that she had spent countless hours training and preparing for this very moment. Radha was determined to make this trip a memorable one, and she was ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead. Back at home, Radha's son Devin was becoming a handful as any kid is. In agreement, Tom stepped up to do more of the daily tasks around the house as well as care for Devin. He leaned into the dad role, not to forget the husband role as well. Radha still worked at her job even though she didn't need to. It was another way of getting out of the house, taking some space away from the two and saving whatever autonomy she had left. Radha, who had more hiking experience now, put on a blaze orange vest before starting her nature trail. Her hunter orange vest was easily visible in the natural landscape, making hunters more noticeable to others. The high visibility was important for preventing accidental shootings, which can happen when hunters mistake other hunters for game animals. She initially wanted to go bear hunting, but with all the house tasks and daily chores of being a working mother, Radha missed out on that season. Although she managed to make it to the popular season of deer hunting. As she set out on her adventure, Radha triple-checked her backpack to ensure that she had all the necessary equipment for her upcoming hike. She specifically checked whether she had her trusty GPS device, which was essential for any long journey. The GPS also featured an emergency beacon that could transmit a distress signal in case of an emergency. This signal would notify nearby officials that immediate assistance was required. As Radha started walking down the trail, she noticed the trees were swaying back and forth from the crisp wind. It was chilly enough to cause a subtle shiver down her spine. When Radha rounded a corner, she paused at some indentations in the mud. When she knelt, it was apparent that some fresh tracks were on the ground. These tracks didn't belong to any deer. She stopped and examined them more carefully, trying to decipher what kind of animal could have left them behind. She noticed the tracks were much larger than those of a deer, with deep claw marks and seemed to be leading further into the woods. Radha's curiosity was piqued. She slowly unfolded the stock for wallaby as she started hiking again, paying attention to other signs of a predator. On her last hunting trip, Radha bagged a small buck. After that successful kill, Radha enjoyed boasting to Tom about it. But overall, her favorite thing to do was spend the night with her husband whenever she made it back home. After this hunting trip, however, she was in for a treat as she was headed back to Australia to visit her parents. Radha continued hiking along the trail, lost in deep thought about Tom's breathtaking smile. Suddenly, she was startled by a faint rustling sound emanating from the trees ahead of her. She immediately stopped and tried to listen carefully, hoping to catch any further sounds. After a few moments of stillness, she decided to investigate the source of the noise. She crept towards the trees as quietly as possible, trying not to startle any wildlife in the vicinity. As she got closer, she could sense something ominous lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a low and vibrating growl pierced the silence, causing her to freeze in her tracks. The hair on the back of her neck stood tall as she saw a pair of piercing yellow eyes glaring at her from the darkness. Radha swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to tread carefully and stay alert at all times. A split second later, a hiss escaped from the same direction, sending a tremble through her legs. Stay calm. She knew she had to respond carefully, for she was in the presence of a dangerous predator. Radha, without hesitation, reached for the emergency beacon, keeping her eyes peeled on the predator. The beast sent another warning growl because of her actions. Radha stopped and decided to squeeze the trigger to scare off the animal. Nothing happened. That's when she realized she hadn't chambered around. Radha, shaking at this point, attempted to slide the bolt, but the safety was engaged. The beast hissed again, sending its final warning. This time, it was alarmingly loud, and that's when Radha knew she was seconds away from an attack. Images of Tom and Devin flashed through her mind, and she knew, no matter what, she had to get back to them. "Let's go, girl," Radha whispered to herself. As she felt the adrenaline rush through her body, she quickly bent her knees and turned to flee. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she heard the sound of the animal leaping out of its hiding place. She couldn't see it yet, but she knew it was big and close. She tried to run faster, but her legs felt heavy and uncooperative. She could feel the animal's breath on her neck as it closed in on her. She had to find a way to escape before it was too late. Radha sprinted down the trail, and as she reached a bend, she grasped her bayonet and the barrel of her rifle with her other hand. She stopped, confused and afraid that the rifle would go off. She looked at her right hand holding the bayonet and her left holding the barrel of the rifle. As she told herself to take her hand away from the trigger, she quickly drew her bayonet upon hearing the cougar rushing towards her. Radha turned to face the giant cougar that was quickly approaching her, its fangs bared and ready to attack. "Come on!" she yelled at it, gasping at its frightening presence. The cougar's large muscles rippled beneath its tawny coat as it prepared to pounce, its yellow eyes fixed on Radha in a deadly stare. She knew that she had to act fast to defend herself against this powerful and dangerous creature. She pulled back the charging handle, chambering around, and fired in the direction of the predator. She was met with a loud growl which almost punctured her eardrums. Radha turned and ran after missing, trying desperately to lose the large cat. She looked behind to see if the cougar was catching up to her. Radha's heart pounded in her chest as she heard the rhythmic thumping of heavy paws on the ground behind her. She pushed her legs to go faster, feeling the wind whip past her as she charged down the dirt path. The sound of Devin's laughter reverberated in her mind, intensifying the feeling of guilt and irresponsibility that had been gnawing at her since she embarked on this journey. She wished she could turn back time, undo her choices, and alter the course of her life, so that she wouldn't have to face the dangerous consequences of her actions. The weight of regret was heavy on her heart as she realized the magnitude of the risks she had taken and the potential repercussions she might have to endure. As she sprinted through the dense forest, the lush greenery around her merged into a blur. Her gaze was fixed on the distant horizon as she charged towards safety, her heart pounding in her chest with fear of the wild cougar that was hot on her heels. Every stride she took, the branches of the trees whipped past her, grazing her skin. She spun around to take another shot at the predator, but her bullet went astray once again, causing tiny fragments of bark and wood to ricochet off the tree trunk. Radha had a determined look on her face as she took off running once again, her feet pounding against the ground with every stride. The wind was blowing through her hair as she pushed herself to go even faster than before, determined to outrun the cougar. She could feel her knees pumping as she strained every muscle in her body. With a quick glance behind her, she could see that the cougar was still in pursuit. Suddenly, she collided with a tree and let out a sharp yelp of pain. A branch had lodged into her shoulder, causing her to stop abruptly. For a moment, she was stunned as she tried to catch her breath and assess the damage. She could feel the blood starting to seep out of her wound, and she knew she needed to act fast. Despite the pain, Radha summoned all her strength and freed herself from the tree. She winced as she pulled the branch out of her shoulder and tossed it aside. Then she quickly placed her hand over the wound, applying pressure to try to stop the bleeding. Radha was in shock as she tried to gather her thoughts and figure out what to do next. Radha's heart was still racing as she looked down the narrow path, fringed with dense foliage on either side. Her eyes widened in terror as the hungry mountain lion emerged from the bushes and padded towards her. She felt a jolt of panic as she realized that she was severely injured and weak, with no means to defend herself. She tried to lift her arm to grab the gun, but her muscles were too feeble to move. Her mind raced as she considered her options, but there seemed to be no way out of this perilous situation. "I will not die like this!" Radha shrieked in pain. As she turned, she struggled to run while leaving a trail of blood behind her. She could hear the lion's paws continuing to taunt her every move. As she made her way down the winding trail, she stumbled and staggered, her breaths coming in short gasps. Her eyes darted around, searching for any sign of rescue. Finally, she spotted an opening in the dense thicket of trees. Without a moment of hesitation, she fumbled for the GPS unit attached to her belt, which had the emergency beacon, and pressed it with trembling fingers. As Radha frantically searched for a means of escape through the opening, she spotted a ledge in the distance. With renewed hope, she made a desperate leap towards it, only to trip and fall. Undeterred, she clawed her way towards the ledge, her heart pounding with fear. As she reached a boulder that was blocking her path, she rolled over and raised her rifle, her hands trembling with adrenaline. The lion sprang at her, its jaws wide open, but Radha was finally ready. With steely determination, she braced the butt of her gun against the boulder and aimed the bayonet at the charging beast. The lion forcefully collided with the weapon, letting out a deafening howl of anguish as it impaled itself on Radha's blade. She held her breath as the animal went limp, its body collapsing beside her. With a mixture of relief and triumph, Radha held back from celebrating too soon as she felt herself covered in her own blood. As she began to lose consciousness, Radha looked over at the cougar, admiring its majestic figure, which was still as a statue. She felt a sense of remorse after taking the life of such a rare animal. It was possible that the cougar was also a parent or had a mate somewhere beyond the trees. The silence of the wilderness was only interrupted by the sound of her heart racing and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered and drifted off to sleep. After several minutes, Radha woke up with an enormous amount of pain. Her hands were still painted with red, remnants of hers and the cougar's blood. With her rifle slung on her back, exhausted and weak, she crawled to a log and propped herself upon it. As the minutes ticked by, she could hear the faint thumping of helicopter blades drumming in the distance. On the verge of blacking out, she spotted something emerging from the woods. It was a large brown bear. Radha could hear the helicopter getting closer. She didn't want the animal to be killed with her last ounce of strength. "Go away!" she managed to yell out. The bear stood tall and proud, towering over the brush with its massive frame. Its fur was thick and shaggy, a mix of brown and black hues that blended perfectly with its surroundings. The bear's ears perked up as it tilted its head curiously, studying her with its large, inquisitive brown eyes. She stood frozen, mesmerized by the majestic creature before her, feeling both awe and fear. It's as if she was completely engulfed in a world where all sounds, tastes, smells, and sensations disappeared, leaving only her eyesight as the sole sense that was still functioning. The bear, undeterred, continued to advance towards her. Without wasting any time, Radha pulled the trigger and fired a round. The loud noise of the gunshot echoed through the forest, and the bear, frightened, turned around and ran away. Radha heaved a sigh of relief, grateful for her quick thinking and the effectiveness of Wallaby. Radha's body felt like an engine that had run out of gas and gave out with only a few drops of adrenaline left in her system. A National Guard helicopter hovered over an opening in the woods. They were the first on the scene for a search and rescue upon the activation of a GPS emergency beacon. A paramedic was lowered down to retrieve what appeared to be a person's lifeless body. As he reached the ground, he could see a deep red stain on Radha's right shoulder.
"Hold on tight, ma'am,"
the paramedic yelled. Devin, Radha whispered as she drifted off to sleep. Radha woke up in a wheelchair. She looked over at Tom and their son Devin.
"Hello, beautiful,"
Tom said, smiling at Radha.
"Don't start boasting about your cougar kill."
Tom was bouncing their son on his knee, and Radha couldn't help but smile. She felt lucky to have him by her side, especially when he took care of her. In a hospital full of doctors and nurses, Tom was there because he wanted to be there, not because he was paid to. As soon as Radha was out of surgery, Tom had rushed to the hospital in Colorado to be with her. Although it was embarrassing to be fed with a plastic spoon, it felt better when Tom did it than when any of the nurses did. Radha knew that Tom loved her deeply, even though he often joked in a harsh tone about taking care of her. She knew he was just teasing and didn't mean it. Radha was excited to return to her small hometown in the middle of nowhere and show off her beautiful family. "I won't be boasting about her anytime soon," Radha said, reaching for Tom's hand.